President Obama says closing Guantanamo Bay is about closing a chapter in our history. But some lawmakers are against the plan, like Senator Mitch McConnell, who says it's illegal. Earlier, the president said the Department of Defense is submitting a proposal to Congress today.
Obama argued that the plan would save the U.S. $1.7 billion over 20 years. He said he backs it fully.
For many years, it's been clear that the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay does not advance our national security. It undermines it. This is not just my opinion. This is the opinion of experts. This is the opinion of many in our military. It's counterproductive to our fight against terrorists because they use it as propaganda in their efforts to recruit. The Defense Department, thanks to very hard work by Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, as well as his team working in concert with the Office of Management and Budget. Today, the department is submitting to Congress our plan for finally closing the facility at Guantanamo once and for all. It's a plan that reflects the hard work of my entire national security team.
Earlier, we spoke with correspondent Margaret Brennan outside of the White House. She broke down the president's announcement and the battle that lies ahead.
Well, this was an appeal from President Obama to Congress to help him shut down the facility. An appeal because he legally can't do what he is proposing today, transfer detainees to U.S. soil without Congress changing the law that currently bars him from doing that. So this is going to be a very tough fight. And President Obama will have to make the decision as to whether he tries to take a politically risky move like attempting an executive action if Congress doesn't go along with him, or if he pushes this along as far as it can possibly go without fully admitting defeat. What you heard from the president was not a vow, this is going to happen, I'm going to make it happen, but rather, as long as I am president, I'm going to chip away at this, and please help me to do this. This should not be politicized. Problem is, it already has been. The president did point out multiple times that it was his predecessor, George W. Bush, who not only opened the facility, but called for its closure, acknowledging that it was a national security risk. So the president's saying, please don't make this partisan, but as we know, it surely will be in this election year.
Margaret, the president pointing out that Guantanamo has been a propaganda tool for terrorists. People who have advocated closing the prison have long said that it's a recruiting ground for militants. Covering the State Department, what have you heard about that? What other countries are saying about the propaganda that is used by ISIS with this symbol?
It is certainly a friction point with our allies because, remember, the U.S. held nationals even from the UK at Guantanamo Bay. This wasn't just people taken directly off the battlefield who were nationals from countries that the U.S. had invaded. This wasn't just Afghanistan and Iraq. These were nationals from all over the world, but the president did point to propaganda specifically. That's something that seems to resonate with people. If you remember most recently those ISIS videos, horrible execution videos of Americans, of other prisoners being beheaded, you saw them on their knees wearing orange jumpsuits. And that is read by intelligence officials as a specific reference to the type of jumpsuits that prisoners are forced to wear at Guantanamo Bay. You also hear in some of the terrorist rhetoric in these propaganda videos reference to torture, or as some would call it, enhanced interrogation techniques that were used at one point at Guantanamo Bay to try to gather information, particularly in the wake of 9/11. And you remember that was hugely controversial in the United States. So yes, this is a symbol that is often used by ISIS and other terrorists who say this is what America does to us writ large as terrorists, writ large as sort of a call to action. But the other side of this argument is, well, what part of that changes if some of these prisoners are transferred to U.S. mainland soil? What part of that changes if not all of them can actually face trial? Because what has happened here is that for 14 years, many of these prisoners have been held without charge, without trial, and have not seen any kind of true justice, the president would argue. They haven't been through the court system. So there's a question now, can they be? Can they face trial in a military court, even in the United States? Or with some of them, was the evidence collection so problematic? Is there even evidence enough to try them? So does this just become Guantanamo North if you bring some of these prisoners to U.S. soil?
Margaret, can we talk a little bit about the timing of this plan? As we spoke about earlier, this was a campaign pledge of President Obama's during his first campaign. And this is, yes, indeed, the final year of his presidency, but it's also an election year. Does any of that play a role, do you think?
This is a huge legacy issue for President Obama. Yes, he campaigned on this, as the president just pointed out. So did his Republican colleague at the time, his counterpart who lost to him, Senator John McCain, has been a huge advocate for shutting down Guantanamo Bay and spoken out against torture. So the president tried to reach across and say this should be bipartisan. But yes, for him personally, he came to office saying that he was going to get this done in his very first year in office. 7 years later, that clearly has not happened. It was a miscalculation of just not only how politically difficult this would be, but operationally how difficult it would be, because this is outside the U.S. justice system that we are familiar with in the civilian sense. It is still not clear if these terrorists could be tried, those who there is evidence against, if they could even be tried as criminals, like some of the individuals that the president referenced there, terrorists who have been caught on U.S. soil. There's this weird gray area of what do you do with some of those individuals scooped off the battlefield where there may not be sufficient evidence against them, but there's not enough evidence to say they're not a security risk. So it is not at all certain that this is going to be closed while President Obama is still in office, and this is certainly to be a question for the 2016 candidates. How would the next president try to shut down this facility if Congress doesn't go along with the plan that President Obama presented today? Yeah,
that was the question I was going to ask you is, Guantanamo Bay really hasn't played particularly high during the campaign now, but do you think maybe this might be an attempt to introduce the topic into the conversation?
Well, look, this is a huge legacy issue for the president, and he's been on record with that. The White House is obviously being sensitive to the politics around this, because when you look at the Pentagon's presentation of this report that I've looked at so far, they've really danced around the specifics of where these prisoners would be transferred to. They've mentioned a few military installations, but they are sensitive to some of the fears of Americans living in some of these districts if prisoners are transferred to where they live. And the president tried to just address that, because obviously that's a political sensitivity there. What congressman wants to say, send the terrorists to my district, right? But the president's saying, wait, take a step back here. Look at this. Look at the Boston bombers, the shoe bomber, Richard Reed. Look at the baddest of the bad are already in U.S. prisons. We can handle this. That hasn't been a security risk so far. You can take less than 60 detainees from Guantanamo Bay and safely keep them on U.S. soil without it being a problem. So they were trying to really sort of gloss over the local politics of that and ease some of those concerns. But I am certain we're going to hear from the candidates very shortly on what they would do with Gitmo.
And in fact, we just have Senator Marco Rubio, who's at a campaign event in Las Vegas, Nevada, just spoke about the closing Gitmo plan. Let's take a listen to that.
Other issues. So you have a right to be frustrated. You wake up this morning to the news of the president is planning to close Guantanamo, maybe even giving it back to the Cuban government. This makes no sense to me. Number one, we're not giving back an important naval base to an anti-American communist dictatorship. And number two, we're not going to close Guantanamo. In fact, we shouldn't be releasing the people that are there now. They are enemy combatants. These are literally enemy combatants, in essence soldiers, though not soldiers, terrorists, of foreign terrorist organizations, many of whom, as soon as you release them, they rejoin the fight against us. Not only are we not going to close Guantanamo, when I'm president, if we capture a terrorist alive, they're not getting a court hearing in Manhattan, they're not going to be sent to Nevada, they're going to Guantanamo. And we're going to find out everything they know.